This is part 2 for express approach and quick learning for repertoire for black. Now, it's a lot more difficult when you try to pick up and learn one given system for black than for white, because you don't have as much flexibility. So with a white, if you don't make really the best moves, you may not get advantage, you may get an equal position, but you're comfortable with your play and you are okay. With a black, you have a lot more responsibility because you cannot be passive. If you are overly passive, you may get really bad position, or if you are inaccurate in complications, you may just get lost position. So you have a lot more responsibility. You have to be a lot more precise. So, well, you don't know. With white, you choose the first move. With the black, you don't know. You have to be prepared for e4, d4, c4 continuations, and you have to be comfortable every time once you pass the opening stage. So, well, let's start with e4. What can we do on e4 to learn one safe system that will get us through the opening? Well, we know the Sicilian is one of the sharpest openings in opening theory, on e4 or d4 together, on whole opening theory. So if this is the sharpest opening, then you have to learn the most, because you cannot play sharp openings without knowing all theory around it. So we must exclude for this preparation Sicilian. So not too many other openings left. I'm excluding French defense, since I don't believe it, and if someone recommends you French, to play French with black, it's not going to be me. And Caro-Kann is a little too passive too. So as one of the openings that I can recommend to play, and it's easy to learn and it's relatively safe, is d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3. Well, now if we play g6 move, then it's regular pure defense. But e5 move is something I want to talk about and something I want to discuss. Now, e5 move, as you can tell immediately, white has a chance to go to endgame right from the opening. Well, it's going to be queens of the board, but it's not going to be exactly an endgame. It's going to be kind of a middle game without queens, because every other piece except for the queen will be on the board. So the most expected continuation for white is d takes e, and queen takes d8, which we're going to analyze first. Also, other possible move is knight f3. It's for a longer game and more of a middle game and possibly more complicated. Well, actually, it's not possibly, it is more complicated. So let's start with d takes e, and d takes e, queen takes d8, king takes d8. And let's talk this position first before we make any moves. We have equal development. We have symmetrical pawn structure. The problem, if there is a problem, any problem for black, is that their king moved and white has a chance to castle long side, castle queen side, with a check, which gives them enough tempo. But is this enough to get any kind of an advantage? Well, let's look. The most precise move and probably the best move is bishop c4. attacking black pawn on f7. And best move for black is bishop e6. Bishop takes e6 and f takes e6. Now let's talk about this pawn structure. There are two ways to assess this position. First, black has double pawns, weak pawns, and white has a big advantage. That's a wrong assessment. The correct assessment, black does have possibly some weakness on in the form of a double pawn, but on the other hand, black controls almost every major square in the center. After bishop takes e6, fe, bishop e3 is the normal move to be expected. We go bishop d6, then maybe f3 with the white. Black has to develop knight to d7. Suppose white castles long. We go king to e7 and knight e2. Now, how should black play this position? Black has dark square bishop. White has dark square bishop. Black has to put their pawns on the light squares. a6, black wants to go b5 next. Next move is b5. There is nothing can white do to stop it. And for instance, if white goes a4, we can easily go rook h to b8 or a to b8, still preparing b5. And move like a5 will be very dangerous for white, since bishop b4 may simply cost white a pawn. So after a6, no matter what white does next, black will go b5, and black has, amazingly, black has control of more squares than white does. White cannot really take advantage of d-file, and they don't really own d-file. For example, if they go rook d2, and we go b5, now they go rook d1, we go rook h to d8. Black is ready for confrontation on d-file. What can white have? Does white have any constructive plan? I don't think so. I don't think white does. I have played this position for white a few times. I've never played it for black, and I never, against a good player, I never got any kind of an advantage. So I don't remember what results were, but results might have been not necessarily indicate the assessment of this position. So this position I consider absolutely equal. Black can go bishop b4, or I don't know, maybe even rook b8 and b4, or a5 and a4 and b4. There is no active plan that white can use in this position. So now let's go back and look at the continuation a little sharper, or, well, I wouldn't say sharper, I would say maybe a little more complicated and with a lot more life and with queens on the board. So this continuation is not to take pawn on e5, keep the queens on the board and go knight f3. Now what I want to do is take on d4, knight takes d4, bishop e7, and after bishop e7, now white has three different ways to play. White has bishop c4 move, which is not the best move, bishop e2 move, and also bishop f4 move. Let's look at them. Why is this so good for black? Well, black wants to castle quick and then play in the center. Black right now has some space disadvantage, so they are looking forward to going d5 at some point. Bishop c4 is not the best continuation because it helps black with a counterplay in the center. Castling, and now white has two moves. White can castle or play bishop b3. Now if white goes bishop b3 in this position, what you should do, you just simply go knight a6, and remember, most of the time you do develop knight on a6 here because you want to put knight on c5. You put knight on c5, you attack the pawn, possibly get rid of a strong bishop. Well, let's see what can happen after knight a6, castle, knight c5, and suppose white goes rook e1. What can we play in this position? I think there are several ways to play. The plan I like and the move I like is a5. Now threatening a4. If white goes a3, we always take the bishop on b3. Well, I would rather take white's bishop on b3 when white cannot recapture with an a pawn. So I would go a5, then possibly I go bishop or c6, maybe rook e8. It's very, very active position for black. After knight c5, white does not have really constructive plan. Well, on something like bishop g5, white has to pay attention that after rook e8, there may be a tactical shot, knight takes e4. It may or may not work, depends on concrete situation. That's what you should calculate. So you go rook e8, and you see possibly you go h6, and maybe then knight takes e4. Or even after h6, bishop h4, you may go knight h7, exchange dark square bishop. Since you have some space disadvantage, you may want to exchange some pieces. But before you do that, it helps to put pawn on c6 to cover entirely d5 square. I think black here has sufficient counterplay to make this opening very playable. I would play it any time, and I do recommend it. This position I think is very playable. Now let's look at what we discussed. The move we discussed now was bishop b3. But why should white go bishop b3 rather than castle? Because after castling, knight takes e4. This is an equal position. White has no advantage. Knight takes e4, and there is d5. Fork, the best move is bishop d3, pawn takes e4, bishop takes e4, and knight d7 with black. Now knight goes to f6. And after knight d7, white can play bishop f4, then we have knight c5, and if white plays knight f5, we have bishop f6 with a very reliable position. On queen g4, we may go knight e5, and on queen g3, maybe instead of knight e5, we can even go rook e8, and after bishop e3, knight e5, attacking queen, and then bishop takes f5. It's very, very safe position for black, and queen d5. White has absolutely no advantage. White has two bishops. Black has centralized knight. It's very difficult to remove, and every one of the pieces black is very, very active. It's totally equal position for black at least. Now, there are a couple of other continuations. The advantage of this opening has one advantage. It's not explored in theory. It's not explained in theory widely. It's not used very frequently, and it's not expected by your opponent. If you really study it well, and you know it upside down, chances are you will get very playable and very satisfactory position.